170 feet of water has completely evaporated. Right now, behind the massive concrete wall of the Glen Canyon Dam, Lake Powell is languishing at less than 24% of its capacity. But what you're seeing isn't a dried-up lake. You're looking at the countdown clock of a structural time bomb poised to tear apart the entire vital system of the American West. Mainstream media keeps lulling you into a false sense of security. They call it a prolonged drought. They reassure you that El Niño or a snowy winter in the Rockies will save everything. But the cruel truth that government supercomputers are trying to hide is, this isn't a drought. This is aridification, the permanent drying up of an ecosystem. And right now, Lake Powell's surface is only 41 feet from the minimum power pool, the death line at which insufficient pressure will cause the hydroelectric turbines to tear themselves apart from the inside. Why should you care about a lake in the middle of the Utah desert? Because 40 million lives are tied to this network. When the Glen Canyon turbines shut down, it's not just a dam going out. It's the moment the power grid for millions of families in 7 states collapses amidst the scorching summer heat waves. It's when billions of dollars worth of food supply chains are broken. When water and electricity are gone, your own family's utility bills will spiral out of control, and your safety will be completely lost. The American West built an entire civilization on a fraudulent contract signed over 100 years ago, and the price of that delusion will be paid at all costs in 2027. Later in the video, we'll delve into the technical details of the worst-case scenario. What will happen when Lake Powell reaches the dead pool, a lake where millions of tons of water are permanently trapped and unable to save anyone's life? As you fly over the winding canyons of the Utah desert, your eyes and brain will deceive you. Looking at the remaining strip of deep blue water, human instinct will tell you, there's still water, everything's fine. But that's a deadly psychological illusion. The amount of water you're seeing is only about 23 to 24% of the reservoir's actual capacity. And in the world of hydrology, a reservoir doesn't need to be completely depleted to be a disaster. Lake Powell isn't a natural wonder to admire. It's a survival machine. That water is the fuel that powers Glen Canyon Dam, the mechanical heart responsible for generating electricity, regulating millions of tons of water, keeping the entire Colorado River system beating, and carrying out the vital water supply between upstream and downstream. But this machine is being deprived of fuel. The inadvertent physical reality of hydroelectric dams is that water must be at a certain height to exert its power. The technical limit threatening to cripple the entire system is known as the minimum power pool, located at 3,490 feet. With current water levels hovering around 3,531 feet, we are only about 41 feet away from this deadly threshold. When the lake level drops below 3,490, the water will still be there, but its weight and static pressure will no longer be sufficient to safely push through the pipelines. The giant turbines will spin in the pressure deficit, facing the risk of violent shaking and self-destruction from within. Nature is refusing to serve human infrastructure. Lake Powell is not collapsing in a day. It is dying, losing its function with each drop in water level, and the first link in the ladder to be cut off was the hydroelectric network. Glen Canyon Dam, however magnificent, is a silent machine. It cannot create its own water. It depends entirely on a massive natural reserve hundreds of miles away, the snowpack on the Rocky Mountains. For decades, this cycle was an unchangeable natural agreement. Winter snow accumulates, spring snow melts, and runoff fills Lake Powell. But this spring, 2026, that agreement has been broken. Snow accumulation in the upper Colorado Basin has reached its lowest level since 1986. But the real tragedy, something daily weather reports lack the time to explain, is the lack of snow isn't the only enemy. The real enemy is a system that has completely lost its ability to convert snow into water. Don't fall into the trap of linear thinking that snow on the mountains will automatically turn into water in the lake. That was a century-old illusion. In an increasingly harsh atmosphere, the journey of a drop of melted snow from the mountaintop down to Lake Powell is a battle for survival, a sure defeat. It must navigate a merciless army of predators. First, the extremely dry soil moisture will act like a giant sponge, devouring billions of gallons of water as soon as the snow melts. Second, unusually high temperatures cause the snow to melt too quickly, or even sublimation, the snow evaporating directly into the air without having time to liquefy. The flow is overwhelmed and evaporates before it even reaches halfway to the reservoir. Science calls this a decline in runoff efficiency. The same amount of snowfall as 30 years ago results in 10% to 20% less water actually reaching the Colorado River through evaporation. The problem isn't just that the sky refuses to send snow. The problem is that the entire basin is in a frenzied thirst. The land is drier, the air is hotter, the snow is evaporating faster, and the river is being drained by its own surrounding ecosystem. Anyone hoping that some random weather phenomenon could reverse this situation is gambling the lives of 40 million people on an illusion. When depletion becomes devastating, the natural human reflex is to cling to the sky for a miracle. And mainstream media always knows how to prepare a familiar dose of reassurance for the public. El Niño. They tell you that the warming Pacific will bend the jet stream. Perhaps El Niño will bring massive winter storms inland. Perhaps it will bring rain and snow back to the west. But with the survival of Lake Powell at stake, the crucial question isn't, will El Niño come? The real question is, if El Niño does come, can a short-term weather phenomenon save an infrastructure system rotten to the core? Climate science doesn't work like a Hollywood script. Historical data has proven El Niño can unleash record-breaking rainfall on the lower basin, similar to California or southern Arizona. But for the upper basin, which provides 90% of Lake Powell's vital flow, the impact of El Niño is merely a toss of a coin. Some years it brings blizzards, other years it brings even more extreme droughts. But let's assume the coin lands heads. Let's assume we have a record winter. The harsh truth is, El Niño is also utterly powerless. A few months of wetness cannot automatically repair decades of dryness. It cannot revive soil that has been heated to the point of hardening. It cannot compensate for the enormous volume evaporated from reservoirs. It cannot quench the insatiable thirst of 40 million people. And certainly, no storm can rewrite a water-sharing system built on optimistic, almost delusional numbers. Lake Powell is not just missing a rainy season. It is missing the entire original climate system it was designed to serve. El Niño may bring a season of hope, but a season of hope can never correct a century of miscalculation. The vocabulary we use shapes how we perceive reality. For the past 2 decades, weather reports and politicians have relentlessly abused the word drought. But drought is a deceptive word. Drought implies a period with a beginning and an end. It sows a false sense of comfort that if we wait long enough, endure patiently enough, the rain will fall again and everything will return to normal. But science has no place for comfort. For the Colorado River Basin, the drought ended long ago. What we are facing now is aridification, and this is not an event. It is a complete reshaping of reality. Drizzlement is a permanent ecological transition to a state of depletion. It changes the entire genetic code of the hydrological system. Higher baseline temperatures turn the atmosphere above us into a giant vapor pressure desiccant. The hot air holds more moisture, and to quench that thirst, it relentlessly extracts water from every surface, from vegetation, from rivers, and from Lake Powell itself. Even more desperately, the ground, heated for years, has changed its physical properties. It refuses to release water. That's why the rare winter storms are no longer a lifesaver. A year of record snowfall might raise Lake Powell's water level by a few feet. The media will celebrate. Politicians will declare the crisis over. But the following summer, under the pressure of drying, that water will evaporate and disappear at twice the rate, pushing the lake to a new, even deeper bottom. The fundamental difference is this: drought is when the sky temporarily doesn't provide enough water. Drying occurs when entire natural systems begin to deplete the little water that remains, even when it is raining or snowing. Our infrastructure is not designed for this reality. A massive reservoir might be built to survive a dry year, or even a decade of drought, but no man-made structure can survive through a new climate era. Standing majestically amidst the vibrant red sandstone canyons near Page, Arizona, the Glen Canyon Dam is a colossal, dome-shaped concrete structure. It's more than just a construction. It's the central figure in humanity's attempt to control nature. Built to store water, generate electricity, regulate flow, and aid in water distribution throughout the Colorado River system, the dam, once a proud symbol of the industrial age when Lake Powell reached its full pool, was a testament to the arrogant belief that human engineering could subdue any ferocious river. But the tragedy of the Glen Canyon Dam lies not in its construction techniques or the quality of its concrete. Its fatal flaw lies in the fundamental data that gave rise to it. This monumental dam was designed and built upon a completely bankrupt system of beliefs. Engineers of the 1950s and 1960s poured concrete based on the climatic assumptions of a golden age, a more abundant flow of the Colorado River, consistent winter snowfall on the mountain peaks, lower temperatures, and reservoirs capable of self-recovery after short periods of drought. It was built for a vibrant river, a river that obediently flowed according to the statistics on paper. But today, that river is gone. No more springs of rushing snowmelt, no more winters guaranteeing water. The colossal dam faces a reality its creators never dared to imagine, a greedy atmosphere evaporating the reservoir, and the meager inflow insufficient to sustain the dam's structure. The problem isn't that the dam is to blame. The problem is that it was built for a river that no longer exists on Earth. Glen Canyon Dam was created to control water, but in this new climate era, it is water that humanity has lost the most control over. The cruelest irony of history often lies in unforeseen paradoxes. To understand the desperation of the Glen Canyon Dam at this moment, we must go back to the spring of 1983. Back then, the specter haunting the engineers wasn't depletion, but a furious excess. That year, a massive amount of melting snow created a raging torrent that slammed into Lake Powell. The water rose so rapidly that it exceeded all safety limits. The emergency spillways on either side of the dam were forced to operate beyond their design capacity. The immense water pressure triggered cavitation. Explosive air bubbles ripped deep holes in the foot-thick concrete, shaking the entire structure. The Glen Canyon Dam stood on the brink of collapse. In a moment of utter panic, the engineers resorted to a desperate measure. Using 8-foot-high plywood sheets, hastily bolted to the top of the dam to stop the overflowing water and save the downstream area from a catastrophic flood. That was the closest the dam came to death, and it happened simply because there was too much water. Now let's look at the reality. The same concrete structure that once trembled with fear of being crushed by historical floods is now dying, deprived of its last drops of water. 40 years ago, they feared the force of the water would break the dam from the outside. Today, they fear the absence of water will paralyze the machine from within. The past threatened with devastating excess. The present is killing it with silent depletion. Both extremes expose the ultimate truth about systemic flaws. 20th century infrastructure is completely incapable of withstanding the extremes of the 21st century. And this time, the disaster doesn't need a cataclysmic flood. It just needs that calm lake surface to continue sliding down a few dozen feet. A hydroelectric dam needs more than just water. It needs water at a sufficient height. Hidden deep within the massive concrete structure of the Glen Canyon Dam are 8 enormous pipes channeling the dam's flow directly into the turbines. At its peak, the system generated 5 billion kilowatt hours annually, powering millions of homes. But as the lake approached 3,490 feet, it crossed the deadly line known as the minimum power pool. Below this threshold, the water remains still in the lake, but its weight, what hydrological engineers call hydrostatic pressure, collapses completely. Without pressure, air is drawn into the pipes, creating countless bubbles that move at terrifying speeds. When they burst, they trigger cavitation, a devastating series of shock waves capable of tearing apart the solid steel blades from the inside. To prevent the machine from self-destructing, they had no choice but to shut down the turbine system. When Glen Canyon fails, a chain reaction disaster will strike the western United States power grid. Amidst the scorching heat of summer, the sudden disappearance of a crucial frequency regulator will push the region's power grid to the brink of collapse. The biggest losers won't be the political elite, but millions of residents and indigenous communities, like the Navajo Nation, who depend more than 40% on this inexpensive hydroelectric power for their daily survival. Losing hydroelectric power means losing a massive source of revenue to maintain the dam itself and the downstream ecosystem. As the massive turbines become silent, iron coffins, panicked managers are forced to look deeper. They desperately seek an outlet in the narrow, rusty discharge pipes at the bottom of the reservoir. But that is far from a safe solution, a desperate gamble. Deep beneath the dam, at an elevation of 3,374 feet, lies the River Outlet Works, a system of 4 massive steel pipes, each 8 feet in diameter. When the turbines at the minimum power pool are swallowed by darkness, these 4 pipes become the only lifeline for releasing water from upstream to downstream. But this is where the blindness of the infrastructure system is most clearly and cruelly revealed. Remember, the River Outlet Works was designed 60 years ago as an emergency escape staircase. Their original purpose was only to provide short-term emergency flood relief, not to serve as the lifeline pumping water for the entire American West day after day. Forcing an aging backup system to shoulder the life-threatening pressure of tens of millions of people is a desperate and insane engineering gamble. Technical test data following the 2023 release dealt a fatal blow to expert confidence. The cavitation phenomenon, the very monstrous bubbles threatening the turbines, is also relentlessly gnawing away at and tearing apart the protective coating inside these discharge pipes. The massive steel valves are vibrating violently under the pressure of the unstable water flow. Attempting to use them continuously at low water levels is like driving a car with faulty brakes downhill at maximum speed. The risk of structural failure is very real. If these discharge valves fail, the Glen Canyon Dam will become a silent wall. It will not only cut off the lifeline of the entire downstream, but also signal the irreversible collapse of the Colorado River hydrological system. But our despair doesn't end there. An even darker waterline looms at the bottom of the abyss, a cruel boundary where water is not only useless for generating energy, but is also completely deprived of its right to flow over the dam. If those final spillway pipes collapse, or the lake continues to sink below its intake threshold at 3,370 feet, the Glen Canyon Dam will officially enter the darkest state in hydrology, the dead pool. The media often misleads the public into thinking that a dead pool means a barren, dry depression with no water left. But the technical truth is far more brutal. A dead pool isn't the disappearance of water, it's the permanent confinement of flow. At 3,370 feet, Lake Powell still contains approximately 1.7 million acres of water. That's a massive volume, but all of that volume is now below all of the dam's spillway systems. It's permanently unable to breach the concrete wall. The water is still there, but it's no longer a source of supply. It's become a silent prison. That stagnant body of water will gradually heat up under the desert sun, evaporate into the atmosphere, and become a toxic reservoir for invasive species like the quagga mussel, severely degrading water quality. And on the other side of the dam, the consequences will be absolute destruction. The lifeline of the Colorado River downstream will be completely blocked. Millions of hectares of farmland will turn to dust. The vibrant cities downstream will be plunged into a drought unprecedented in modern history. States will tear up treaties and engage in life or death legal battles for every last drop of water. The downstream ecosystem will collapse into dead canyons. Lake Powell will transform from a great regulating machine into a useless water-filled graveyard. But this nightmare doesn't end at the Glen Canyon Dam, because right now, hundreds of miles downstream, another massive lung of the entire system is also gasping for breath at its breaking point. The Colorado River crisis cannot be measured by the collapse of a single dam. The entire vast system breathes with two enormous lungs. Lake Powell protects the upstream Glen Canyon Dam, while Lake Mead supports the downstream Hoover Dam. The true strength of this system, which has fueled our illusion of safety for nearly a century, lies in its compensatory capacity. When one buffer weakens, the other steps up. But the disaster we face today is not a localized decline. It is a devastating cascading event, where both lungs are collapsing simultaneously under the pressure of a new climate era. Right now, Lake Mead hovers at only 33% capacity. When the Bureau of Reclamation was forced to make the urgent decision to cut the discharge from Lake Powell to keep Glen Canyon Dam afloat, they directly tightened their grip on the downstream. Holding back water at Powell means pushing Lake Mead into a state of starvation. Every decision now is no longer about solving the problem, but about choosing which area will bleed first. With Powell low, Mead low, snowmelt evaporating, and water demand remaining undiminished, the system has been stripped of all safety margins. There is no room for error. Over 40 million lives hang by a thread. From glittering metropolises like Las Vegas and Los Angeles to billion-dollar agricultural fields in the California desert, all are drawing on the same depleted blood. Every gallon of water held back upstream is a death sentence for downstream. But what turns this hydrological machine into a ticking time bomb is not just nature's fury. The ultimate tragedy lies in the fact that this collapse was predetermined from the very first words of a fraudulent contract signed a century ago. The entire legal framework of the West is built on an illusion, the Colorado River Compact Act of 1922. This agreement allocates 15 million acres of water annually to the states, but science has exposed the bitter truth. The 1922 data was taken during the wettest period in 800 years. Actual flow now is only 13.5 million acres. They divided a pie larger than it truly was. For a century, this structural deficit was masked by Powell and Mead's massive stockpiles. Now the stockpile is empty, and the century-old debt is due. The current operating agreement expires at the end of 2026. Entering 2027, 7 states, 30 indigenous tribes, and 40 million lives will face a legal vacuum. Who will be sacrificed? How much will be cut? If they don't compromise, the federal government will be forced to intervene with legal force. El Niño may bring fleeting showers across the West, but it can't make snow last longer in a boiling atmosphere. It can't stop arid land from devouring the flow. It can't bring Lake Powell back to the era in which this dam was designed to serve, and it certainly can't fix a century of diluting water that the river never truly had. Lake Powell isn't just drying up. It exposes the most brutal truth. The American West built an entire civilization on a river they deluded themselves into believing was greater than it actually was.